People say to me, you must be great at poker. This is where the Dharma and the being non-reactive and not quick to judge all plays an important role.
And your expertise with facial expression, emotion, and compassion. And I am so fascinated. A little nervous because my facial expression might change and you'll be like, oh, what happened?
It's so funny because people, when they find out that I'm an expert in facial expression, they get self-conscious. I am noticing these things all the time, speech patterns or their tone of voice changes, however, or the content of what they say. Noted, noted. They're gently noted. You don't know why that's there. And even if it was fear, emotions don't tell you their causes. Was it because they were afraid of what I was talking about? Were they nervous about being with me? Was it the content? Are they hiding something? There's all these possible things. So you have to be.
Good afternoon, Dr. Erika Rosenberg. Thank you so much for being here with us for Chung Huong Institute podcast. Erika, I have heard so much about you and your expertise with facial expression, emotion, and compassion, and I am so fascinated. A little nervous because my facial expression might change, and you'll be like, "Oh, what happened?" So, can
Well,
you?
well, thank you for having me, and I hope your expressions change. If they don't change, that's a concern. And it's so funny because people often, when they find out about me, that I'm an expert in facial expression, they get self-conscious. And there is some extent to which I am noticing these things all the time, just as you might notice changes in people's, speech patterns or their tone of voice changes, however, or the content of what they say. I notice those things too. However, it just kind of all fits into this general picture, and so it's not a quick judgment I'm ever making, but it's just sort of noted, noted. They're gently noted and held. And I think this is where the Dharma and the being non-reactive and not quick to judge all plays an important role.
Yeah, I love how you say that. And you oftentimes I see talk about common humanity. It seems like that's something you embody, which I really want to dive deep inside with you. But before we do that, let's back up. Can you share a little with our audience who you are, how you got into this phenomenal work that is really rare to bridge these kind of practices, Eastern practices, with science in a way that's acceptable?
Yes, well, thank you. Yeah. Just, I can tell you, I'll try to keep this to a couple minutes. I mean, I don't know how long you want for this one little part, but I could go on, this could be our whole discussion. And I'll just give you a couple minutes on what I do and how I got there, just to say that what I do now, if I had to try to put it into a phrase, is I am an educator, a scientist, an author, and my work is focused on really connection between people, our understanding of one another, our feelings, and how we behave in the world, and helping people, and really helping people have less suffering and more ease in their life, and be able to connect with one another better. That's a very broad rubric for a lot of things. And one of the things I hate having to do, I hate's a strong word, but I don't enjoy it. And for that reason, it comes my way often, how life works, is to have to give people a bio sketch, some quick description of what I do, because I feel like it'd be easier if there were just one headline, right? So it's a very broad headline that basically encompasses the scientific work on emotion, which focuses on facial expression. However, I entered that because of an interest in emotions and health. And in particular, I was interested in the effects of stress on health when I was a young college student. I started in neuroscience. I was studying these things in animals, and it didn't feel there were a lot of ethical reasons and substantive reasons why this didn't feel like the right place to ask and answer the questions I had, and got into this sort of nascent field of health psychology in the late 80s, which is when I went to UCSF for my PhD and started studying stress and health. And in my first year of grad school, trying to understand this very vague concept called stress, Paul Ekman, the pioneer of facial expression work in modern psychology, happened to be at our school. I didn't even know that. He came in and talked, and it was an epiphany for me because he was taking something by his work on facial expression, something that was so subjective and private, like emotion, and making it observable. So that's how I got into the facial expression work, was through my interest in understanding how emotions affected our, not just our thoughts, but our feelings and our physiology, and changed our health in many ways. So that was that route. And all along, I started practicing meditation when I was a graduate student. And these were parallel trajectories for a very long time. And it wasn't until the around the turn of the century that I got connected with the work bringing these fields together in the early days of the Mind and Life Institute. And ironically, because I didn't know as a grad student that Paul Ekman was also being pulled into this. It wasn't until I was a new professor on the East Coast at the University of Delaware, and I was visiting with Paul on a visit out. He told me he was going to see the Dalai Lama, and he was very skeptical because he was, a big man of science and didn't do that kind of thing. And it was partly as a function of his conversations with other scientists who have been involved at this meeting and His Holiness, that this work on bringing Western practices for dealing with emotion, emotion regulation, understanding emotion, together with some Tibetan Buddhist practices to help people suffer less. So my first exposure to that kind of um, connection was in about early 2000. I think guess it was around 2001, 2002, and got kind of pulled into an early project that brought those two things together, the Cultivating Emotional Balance project. And that was how I first got connected. And it's very satisfying, right, to have these parallel paths, my personal practice, which had been so enormously beneficial to me, and my professional work, to merge. Because when I was a young professor, I was doing these little projects on mindfulness with one of my grad students, and we had to do it in the closet. It was not okay to do that kind of work. I had my fancy lab with facial expression, that was okay. But studying things like mindfulness was considered way out. And now it's so mainstream. It really is, at least in the United States and a lot of other Western countries. It's, in terms of science, it's become much more mainstreamed, and people in the public actually know what mindfulness means, sort
Yes.
of.
How would you define mindfulness, Erica?
Oh, wow. That's the $100,000 question, is how do you define mindfulness? Well, when I talk about it with my students, and I think that's probably the level that works here, I really like to think of it as being, you know, aware and present with what's happening at hand. In this moment of consciousness, and moment, what does a moment mean? What's now, right? And seeing, sensing, feeling, noticing, without judgment. Um, and some people imbue, then add in this like kindness and all this stuff, which I think follows, if you put space between stimulus and response, and you are fully present, then it's easier to and let your values permeate that moment. However, it's really about being present with all of it, you know as much. And it's I think, like a lot of things, it's kind of a continuum. There's degrees of, but that's my general, lay definition of mindfulness.
Can you tell us how has your life transformed? I mean, studying emotion, studying facial expression. I'm going to ask a very raw question. Do you hide your facial expression well? If you don't like something, no. And how does mindfulness tie in to that for you?
um, so there's a lot of questions there.
There is.
Let's keep it specific on the question of, um, well, do I hide my facial expressions well? Let's see. I just, it's funny. People say to me, "You must be great at poker," and I say, just because I'm an expert at understanding expressions doesn't mean I'm good at preventing my face from moving. And I can be aware of. I think one of the things that I've done trainings that integrate the two things, where I've tried to help people understand not only emotions in others, but the signals that they might be sending out, and using emotion. I mean, using mindfulness, compassion, self compassion to become more aware of that. So I do bring awareness and compassion into my repertoire, into how I behave in the world with others, and being mindful of what I'm sending out. However, I'm not a good mask, I'm not good at hiding everything, partly because you can probably tell from my personality. I'm engaged and extroverted, and I connect to people, and one could say I'm a connection junkie. I love connecting to people. And so nonverbal behavior is a part of that. So I don't try to suppress. And the people who are good at poker, I mean, I can read the signs of other players, but the people who are good at poker, first of all, are good poker players, which I'm not. And then also they can like totally, you know, the best poker players don't give up anything in their face. In fact, there's research on this. Their tells are through hand gestures. And anyway, that's an aside, but it's a misunderstanding a lot of people have. So it has come into it does what comes into my daily life more is what I see in others' faces, and it's a very powerful source of information. People don't control their faces as well as they control what they say. And there's a whole application of this, like in forensic psychology, people who I've trained people who do interrogations, how to make sense of nonverbal behavior. The face is only one channel. You need to look at other channels, what people are saying, the intonation of their voice. There are other nonverbal signs of emotion that are not just through the face. Voice is a powerful one. And when I say voice, I don't mean words. I mean the pitch and the volume of speech. Is it quivering because the vocal cords are innervated by the autonomic nervous system. So when people are stressed, it changes their voice. So there's all kinds of tools, and just to not just jump to judgment, that you have to make sense of all these tools. So whether you are bringing this into a professional context or in daily life, like if I'm with someone I care about and I see something, or someone I don't know very well, but I'm interacting, I see something come through on their face in a subtle way, like quick sign of a lower face component of fear that they don't even know, like a micro expression that they're doing. I make note of that, but I hold that,
Mm.
because I feel like you don't know why that's there. And even if it was fear, emotions don't tell you their causes. Was it because they were afraid of what I was talking about? Were they nervous about being with me? Was it with the content? Are they hiding something? There's all these possible things. So you have to be patient and considerate, and know that when you get something like that in an interaction, it's not something people are knowingly sharing with you.
I
Um,
love that.
so yeah. Anyway,
And
that's a lot in response to that question, but
thank you, Erica. Erica, and I
mindfulness
also,
and compassion are a big part of that. Like having the wherewithal not to be reactive when you learn those things about somebody.
yeah, and I wonder also like the myths, right? What is it they say? Like if you look, I don't know, left or right, and it's a lie, but then it might be a fly or something else happening.
Those data are there. A lot of that's been debunked.
Yes.
That the direction that you look, that comes from what's that called? I'm losing. It'll come back to me. Neurolinguistic programming. That's where it comes
Mhm.
from, and methodologically, a lot of that research is not real solid, and a lot of it's been debunked. And people look away when they're talking to you. And if you look at me long enough, well, I'm looking at you on a screen, so it's different. But often we do know that when there's cognitive processing going on. So if you're trying to retrieve a thought or a memory, they will look away. In fact, it's more suspect if someone never looks away. That's odd. And when you look at things like sociopaths and who have no emotional, um, they don't have anything invested in getting caught. They don't care. There's a lack of empathy in true sociopathic cases where people have done horrific things. There's a tendency to be kind of riveted on you, right? And so not to say that someone who looks at you all the time is sociopathic, but that it's not normal to never look away, and that we have to be careful about what we attribute to side glances.
How about the ones who are poker masters, right? Masters of the poker face and also maybe even masters of hand gestures. I've met quite a few where you cannot guess at all what is happening, what's true and what's real.
Mhm.
What can we
So
know about that?
well, I'm not an expert in studying people who, are poker masters. And in terms of people in daily life who are like that, I would have to see them because it's possible that there are things that we use this word called leakage. And it's like if you think of what that means literally, like if you have a container that's trying to hold things in, but it's seeping out. So in the deception field, we talk about leakage of is something seeping out that they're not intending to share with you. And sometimes they're very, very subtle actions. So quite apart from the poker masters, you were talking about just day-to-day interactions with certain people who don't seem to share anything at all, there might be something that's leaking out. And then another thing that you're looking for um, when you're trying to, again, this is really kind of reserved for the deception detection
Mm.
context, is not only are they hiding something, is it leaking out that they're not intending to share, but is there the absence of what might be considered appropriate affect? So if they're claiming to be genuinely distressed by something that happens, but there's absolutely no sign of it in their nonverbal behavior, that's again not definitive, but as I say when I'm talking to people who are trying to use this work professionally, it's a red flag. So it's something, if you are doing an interview or an inquiry or an interrogation, you will want to come back and probe and get more information about what might have been going on at that point.
Mm.
That's the same is true with if something leaks out on the face that doesn't fit what they're saying. They're saying everything's fine, but the brow is doing that in a subtle way. So, although that wasn't subtle because I was posing it for you, but anyway, yeah, I could go again. Any of these could be the full conversation that we have here.
Yeah, I think
Um,
I should have scheduled a 3-hour interview with you.
yeah, well, next time we can do more.
Thank you. Erica, what about the other side of it? I mean, nowadays the world is so hyper elevated, I would say, in emotions and not really positive ones. Yeah, how do like if when people come across others who maybe be are like easily lashing out, or if they themselves easily lash out or are easily reactive, is there any advice that you think the world can benefit from hearing nowadays?
Mhm, mhm. Slow down, be kind, put yourself in the other's shoes. Remember that we're all just in this together. We're going to get to common humanity right away here. I think that we live in a culture, especially in the United States right now, although I think it's really all over the world because of how much smaller our world is these days, that we're of strong polarizing opinions, and that if you consume slow down and turn off the media, and all of us, I'm connected, and many of us are connected to what's going on in the world. How do you mindfully consume of what's going on and also give yourself breaks from it? Because that's only one perspective. You can get the information without all the attitude and opinion and fire that's there. So there's a lot going out there that is intended to polarize, and we might and they might activate strong feelings. And strong feelings are not to be avoided. Strong feelings occur and we can learn from them. One of my teachers, Tartang Tolku Rinpoche, says we can be grateful for our emotions. We have no better sign for what really matters to us. Bring those emotions, for those who are practitioners, the emotions could come right into practice and you see them. And this is where the spaciousness and mindfulness and slowing down and self-compassion and compassion for everybody play a role. Like, what is this? If you notice that you're feeling fearful, like that indicates to you that you're feeling threatened, right? So what's the threat here? What is it, real? Is it proximal? What can I do about it? And same with anger. Like what is it? With anger that comes up when there's like a blockage of a goal or an ego threat, or there's a lot of different. We know emotions come from certain appraisals of how relevant they are to us. In what way are they relevant? Is it a threat? Usually that's fear. If there's a loss, that's sadness. Anger, there's some glow blockage, obstacle, etc. Happiness, joy, when things are going our way. But there's always some connection to where I am. And so you can look at the threat evaluation, and then you can question yourself, is it a threat, or is it a threat now, or is it a threat in the future? What can I do about it? It opens up space for flexibility, and then there's the opportunity then to hold this here, make some space, retool. Emotions are not these static things. They change. You can change the energy of it. You can reappraise, evaluate the situation such that it's not immediately threatening. There are a lot of immediate threats. There are a lot of distal threats. There are a lot of amazing things. There are people doing good things. I subscribe to some newsletters about, good things that are happening in the world. Consume that. See what's positive and play a role in it. But in terms of just the reactivity, I think I want to get back to common humanity because you mentioned it earlier, and it is sort of the core of what I'm doing in my practice and in my teaching, is to remember that in the presence of all these polarized opinions, the differences among us and where we come from, what we believe, um, religious background, gender identity, sexual orientation, how big or small we are, what attractive we are, the color of our skin, all these, sickness, health, all these variations. At the core, we're all just here on planet Earth trying to get through life, without too much suffering and maybe a little ease and even some joy. That's so much bigger than all the differences, that if we can remember that it offers an opportunity to connect, with other people, that instead of feeling it like we're two separate groups, we are part of this bigger group of humans just on Earth trying to get through life without too much suffering and a little joy. That helps make the bridge for connecting, and also for solving some of the problems that we're facing in the world today, which are huge. And we have to begin by talking to one another.
Are humans creating problems because they're bored? I mean, it seems like it. Like there's so many meaningful things to do. Why do we create problems? Why does drama consistently have to unfold for people? And I'm not talking about on necessarily the large scale, but even community scale or inter kind of circle.
I think so. There are some very real big problems. There
Yeah.
always are, right? And I think that the culture that we're living in right now, and again, I'm the perspective of someone living in the United States, um, even before, you know, the recent change in political administration, it's just been very volatile for a while. It's kind of built on polarizing people, so there is this kind of tribal mentality of us versus them that's very reinforced. And so that creates a problematic atmosphere. And then I think social media play a huge role. So many people, I mean, and having these things,
Yeah.
phones, for those of you who are not seeing the video right now, I just held up my phone. Um, Taking our awareness of all this and taking it into this little small space and this world, that we have a portal to it through this little small device that gives us only a very certain kind of picture, and people complain. That's what makes social media, is more the complaints. Unless, like me, I tend to watch these little videos of people cake decorating. Like, that's better than the complaining. But it's and then remembering to look out the window, go outside. It's gorgeous. And there's all these creatures. And even if even if you're in a city, there are places where the light is hitting the sidewalk and there's a shadow cast, and there's a tree growing up out of a crack. And there's all these miracles every day. And I think we have to put down the devices. And even if they're in our lives, like sometimes when I'm writing and I get distracted, like I'll set the timer and put it away and I can't look at it for a certain amount of time. Like, get off these things, take long breaks. I love it when I go on retreat and we have to turn in our phones. What a joy that is. And it's so all these things work against real connection. And we are not connecting with one another on a regular basis in the way that humans evolved to be connecting with one another. And I mention evolution because even though it feels like this long ancient process that I'm hearkening to, um, it's the way it works. Evolution works slowly. The behaviors that we have and the tendencies we have are based on how our ancestors solved problems in the ancient past. We're living with that. So we are designed, by nature to be social creatures, to connect with one another, to be in nature, and we are not living that way. We are cooperation works. It has worked for all of human history, and we are not living that way. So I think the more we can get back to that, the happier we'll be, and we need more community. Seeing shopping centers and main towns closing down because of internet shopping, that's the commonplaces. We need the commons. We need things like that. That's how humans, that's how we go. That's how we do it.
And earlier, Erica, you mentioned the word feeling, but previously you mentioned emotion. What's the difference between feelings and emotions?
Feeling is a good question. And I remember having to answer this on a grad school exam or something like that.
Give us the real
It's
answer, not
really,
a
and
grad
this is
answer.
interesting. This is really more that comes into the philosophy. Feelings I consider a broader rubric. Feelings, there's all kinds of feelings. There are feelings that are, I'm feeling tired, I'm feeling hungry, I'm feeling cold. So I'm referring now to drives or sensations that I might be experiencing in the workspace of my conscious mind right now. So any tonal quality, a quality that your conscious experience have that's embodied,
Mm.
that's feeling. And I do think the body is part of a feeling. And this is my definition. It's similar to some that you might see out there. But so feelings can encompass a lot of things that aren't emotions. Emotions are more specific. Emotions are acute responses that we have to situations in that we encounter in the world, although this can be a thought too, that have some significance to us in some way, our safety, our well-being, our pleasant, our pleasure, pain, all those things, and activates, our bodies. Emote means to move, so emotion has um, this body activation part of it, and it has, body activation, it has a quality, has a feeling to it. There is something that sad feels like that's different from what happiness feels like and what fear feels like and contentment feels like. So it has a quality. It also has things it does to our heart, and our breathing, because it activates the body. It might generate a set of thoughts, but emotions are more specific, a specific kind of feeling. Yeah. Does that
And
answer for you?
yeah, so does the feeling turn into an emotion, and does an emotion turn into a mood?
Okay, so moods, it's funny. I have a paper on this called Levels of Affect that it's funny, an obscure little paper I wrote in 1998 that gets cited a lot. It's funny. It was I'd say emotions, the first part of it, emotions and feelings, emotions are feelings, but not all feel emotions have feelings, but not all feelings are emotions. Whereas the mood thing is a different level of affect. So if we talk about this affective realm in terms of all those things emotional, there's different levels. Emotions are very acute, they don't last very long. We usually know what causes them, and we know from laboratory research where we actually study a number of indicators of emotion, facial behavior, physiology, that emotions don't last very long. Just really, they're usually only a few seconds long. And the reason why it feels like an emotion can last longer is one, it may be a mood, and I'll define mood in a minute. Or more likely, you are reactivating the emotion. So let's say take something like anger, where you somebody did something. Let's take a daily life situation. Let's say you're in line at the grocery store and someone rudely cuts you off, in front of you, and they take your spot. You're like, "Hey, wait, I was next." Or someone says something to you, like they cut you off and you get an argument and they start insulting you or something like that. And when that happens, you could get really frustrated. I was there first, or what are you saying? I wasn't, whatever. And then that when you get triggered like that and the emotion of anger gets generated, then you are actually, your threshold to more anger has been lowered because you're already steaming, right? And then you got red glasses on, if you will. You're looking for trouble, and you then see the next trigger, so it can escalate because you're primed for anger, if you will. This is where the mindfulness and compassion can come in. Because if you're able to watch this emerge, see the irritation come up, it's okay. It's going to take, I've been practicing for 35 years, and you can't stop that. I can't stop. I love Pema Chodron once talked about, no, I still see it, but you don't grab the hook, right? You get agitated, and you can see, okay, am I going to, and sometimes you might get a little worked up. Depending on my mood, I might say something I regret. But if I'm good, and I'm stable, I'll see it, and then I'll just decide, is it worth it? No, it's not. The worst one is when someone's thwarted you or insulted you, and then you go away, and for the next half hour you keep thinking, oh, if I'd only said this to them, that would have really gotten them, right? You come up with the clever retort that wasn't available at the time. But what a waste of time that is. That was a half an hour where you could have not been feeling that way. And if you remember impermanence, that every second counts because you don't know what you got, everything changes. You also remember, and this is what I tell my students, if you've been practicing self-compassion, really reinforcing this in your practice to like everybody be free of suffering, may I be safe, may I not have um, suffering or pain, if you're really reinforcing that, you can learn how to let go, because in the middle of that moment where you see that you're having this reaction, because you've been practicing and you have the spaciousness to see it rather than be in a reflex mode, right? You see you're having the reaction, and then you can go, oh, wait, I don't want to suffer. And I don't want to make them suffer either, right? So I'm going to drop it now. And eventually that breaks through. This is where this is why in my compassion class I always teach about the how the emotions work that way, how you might not be able to stop it when it first comes out, but what you can stop is whether you let it perpetuate, and whether the feeling, which you can regulate and breathe through and dissipate. You don't want to bottle it up. You can transform it. The feeling doesn't have to lead to a regrettable action. That's where the anger becomes destructive, because the emotion itself isn't. We even got the Dalai Lama to admit this once. The anger itself isn't destructive, it's the actions that it can generate. The anger is just energy. So what is a mood? Mood is more of, if you know the distinction between phasic and tonic. Phasic are short disturbances in a graph, and a tonic are slow changes. Moods tend to be more background. Emotions occupy the focus of they're figural, right? When they happen, everything's about that moment. It's hard to put it off. Moods are more in the background. What causes a mood? Sometimes a lot of certain kinds of emotions can lead to a mood. If you have a lot of difficult experiences, you can wake up feeling somewhat sad and depressed. There can be biological changes that lead to certain moods. We don't, the thing about moods is we don't always know their causes. Sometimes we can just wake up in a mood. And they also don't always have, and this is the philosophy part, a clear object. And what we mean by that is, what is it about? I can say that thing in the grocery store. I know what that anger was about, and but knowing, like, if I wake up in an anxious mood and I can think of all these things that aren't making me happy, but what is the thing that it's focused on, it's vague, so moods are actually the things that can be more difficult for us because they're harder to address. They tend to be, and they do, another thing that moods do is they can affect our thresholds to being susceptible to certain emotional states. So if you wake up in an anxious mood, you might be a little bit more susceptible to fear. Your threshold of fear's lower. If you wake up irritated, didn't get enough sleep, you're cranky, Or for me, I get hangry if I don't get food. I get hangry, and so I warn people. I tell my partner, I tell him, I'm like, I'm hangry. Watch out, don't get here, you know. So anyway, I don't know if that addresses your question. And then there's even another level you could talk about in terms of what are like affective traits. You know, some of us, you know, personality dimensions that are more part of our character. You know, whether someone tends to be more of a joyful person or more of a, you know, cantankerous. It depends on, you know, a lot of factors.
Tell us, why is emotional intelligence important? I mean, you've kind of addressed this, but I have found every teenager I have spoken to in the last 2 years has said to me, we don't need emotional intelligence. We don't need to learn this stuff. And every person, I'm generalizing here, okay, not every, but majority of people between 30 and 45 I have spoken to in the past 1 year have said, we don't even need anything about compassion because we all know compassion. But then I see them, being not compassionate. So I know these are two big questions here.
Well, first of all, I'd like to know who you're talking to about the compassion thing. And I think that partly comes from people not understanding what compassion is.
Yes.
And so I have to address that for a second. You know, that compassion is not weak, compassion is strong. You know, because if it's, I love the metaphor that Roshi Joan Halifax gives. She's one of my teachers, and I think she writes brilliantly about this. That compassion gives you strong back, soft front. And the strong back comes from, in order to cultivate compassion, you are present with suffering. You are inviting it to be there with you. And you stay. You don't flee when the going gets tough. You learn how to open and be soft. The soft heart is, I'm going to see what's going on. I have to feel its difficulty because this is the common humanity and the empathy, know what it's like to suffer, and I don't want to suffer. And so therefore I can see why it's very difficult for you to suffer, you know, for everybody around the world to be going through pain, that this is awful and it hurts. And I'm not running. You know, sometimes I tell people the most compassionate thing you can do for somebody who's suffering is just to stay, you know. And so the more you work with compassion in your mind and in your life, the stronger you get to be present. It is a fierce thing. It is exactly what the world needs now. And bring it on, baby. I mean, because life is tough. And if you have compassion, it's a ticket. It's a ticket to see hope, I think, because it's like we can get through this and if we do it together, you know, and it's a way to reach out. You know, you know, I do a lot. I'm politically active. These are hard times. You know, I've been involved in a lot of political causes, and to me, the greatest work comes and the biggest benefits come from having conversations with people who think they're in polar opposite to you. Because again, you can find the common humanity and you don't run away from it because it's hard. So anyway, compassion rocks, and it's fierce and it's strong. And I think if you present it well, you can really engage young people with it. As far as the EQ question is, you know, this one I think is almost, I can't say 100%. You know, EQ means emotional quotient, you know, and there's EI, emotional intelligence, just emotional intelligence knowledge, that whole domain generally. I think a lot of it comes from social media.
Yeah.
And I think there I have informal data on this from a colleague, and I'm also seeing it in, I've had to engage in social media for my work to advertise things and you know, because that's the way you let people know about things. I've recently had to venture into TikTok, which is a very bizarre place. And the more I watch a lot of the reels and stuff, the more I realize that people are using their faces less. A colleague of mine who's a former student of mine who's now a professor, and she tells me about how there's this experiment she does in her class with that she's been using for like 10 years now, about asking people to like put on the expressions of certain situations. And she said it's alarming to her that people can't do it. They don't know what certain things look like, certain basic emotions like disgust. You know, that is such a primal expression that we share with non-human animals. A lot of primates have a similar expression of disgust, you know, the wrinkling of the nose, and it's going to be to the detriment of our species, I think. You know, so um I think it's a real problem because it's one thing to interact through the portal of a digital world, and it's another thing to interact face to face. And that all it takes is a major disaster for the power grid to go down, and you have to interact with other human beings. And if we are headed for any kind of like major worldwide environmental catastrophe, um, you need to be able to engage with other human beings. And so it's not a gone skill. If you ever want to be intimate with somebody else in real life, that's an important thing. You know, it is our destiny to be emotional creatures. And you know, that said, there, you know, when things drop out of the repertoire, I would not be surprised if we did some like major measurement of I think it's more of a Gen Z and younger thing. I don't think it's so um maybe the young millennials, but I think that yeah, there's definitely been a shift for younger generations. You know, that said, I know, you know, both my sons are Gen Z. One's an older Gen Z. He says he identifies more with millennials, and the other one's kind of square in Gen Z, and he's an actor, you know, and some of these folks kind of turn against, you know, my older son just, he's working on an organic farm. My younger son is an actor and he's very much in the world, but he's, you know, feeling is his work, you know. So anyway, it's disturbing.
Thank you, Erica. Erica, before we close, we have a ritual here. Our ritual is that the previous guests ask a question to the next one. So your question is, as a parent, how do you handle disturbing emotions within yourself, especially when your children, either now or previously, have reacted or have behaved in ways that you highly, highly disagree with? How do you
As a
still be a good parent?
as a parent, how do you react to difficult emotions in yourself? Like when your kid does something that's kind of counter to what you believe.
Yeah, maybe something you would find unethical, or maybe something that you're just like, you would
There's a
want to
couple
blow
that
up
that's a very
about.
complex question. Not a quick one to answer. I think there's issues though about regulating your own response and being careful, just sort of all those things I was speaking to before, not to respond reflexively when you're agitated and to make space for your feelings. And so sometimes that might mean for a moment or whatever, taking a break from whatever's going on, that you might not have the immediate thing that's the right prescription for what they need to hear, so that you, because you don't want to offer the wrong thing. And not that I've been perfect, if my kids ever listen to this, you know, not that I've been perfect, but might be able to know, to make to know the difference between how you're feeling and what would be the most constructive thing for the situation with your child, you
Thank
know.
you.
So regulate that and then have your response to them be based more on a value system. So de-escalating any harm that might be going on immediately, if that's the kind of situation, but it's okay to then pause and then reframe and be able to compose yourself and do the constructive thing.
Thank you, Erica. If people want to talk to you, find your interviews or anything about you in the future, how can they do so?
Their best way, well, if they want to talk to me, they can reach me, they can contact me. If they go to my website, which is erikarosenberg.com. I can also be found on, I am on Instagram, and I'm also on TikTok now. I put a lot of my TikTok, I put my I can give you those logins later, but on TikTok I've started using just to put facial expression stuff. On Instagram I share some of my compassion stuff. I also have a YouTube channel, and my YouTube channel is for Erica. Again, I'll give you these handles. I think my YouTube is at the bottom of my and LinkedIn are at the bottom of my email, so you might have those. But on YouTube, I tend to post some longer videos that I've created. They're educational. I have some Dharma talks on there, and I also have some facial expression videos on there as well. But
Great.
you can reach me through my website, you know, hit contact, and you can send me an email that way.
Thank
Yeah.
you so much, Erica, for your
Thank
time.
you. This was fun. Yeah, I enjoyed talking with you.
Thank you.